I called my best friend. The phone rang only twice before being answered. I was about to tell you about an exhausting day at work, the endless search for solutions to problems that seemed to have no end, but something stopped me. In the background, a familiar voice. Her voice. I knew every nuance, every inflection. It was my wife's voice. I felt the ground open beneath my feet. Why was she with him? A doubt crossed my mind like a sharp blade. Would they be together? It couldn't be. I knew they talked sometimes, but I never imagined there would be anything more. The silence that followed that discovery was crushing. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Hello? Are you there? His voice, on the other end of the line, echoed distantly, but I couldn't respond. It was like my brain was short-circuiting. My mind reeled as the heat of blood surged through my body, chest tight, hands sweating. She was there, with him. A wave of disbelief mixed with despair washed over me. The only thing I could do was hang up. The silence in the room seemed to scream around me. I needed answers. A part of me refused to believe this was real, that my own wife could be involved with my best friend. There was a betrayal there, hanging in the air, like a poison that slowly contaminated everything I knew. It didn't take long for the pieces of the puzzle to start falling into place. The fake smiles, the casual encounters, the lame excuses. Everything now made sense. Every moment, every detail that I had previously ignored was now crystal clear. Reality hit me with the force of a punch to the stomach. They were deceiving me. It wasn't just a physical betrayal, it was the complete destruction of the trust one had built over the years. The weight of this realization crushed me, and a cold anger began to boil within me. It wasn't just a wife's betrayal, it was the betrayal of the man I considered my brother. I spent days in a dense fog, trying to understand what had happened. Trying to figure out where it all started to fall apart. The meetings she had with her friends, his business trips that curiously coincided with her family meetings. The pattern was there all along, but I didn't want to see it. I wanted to believe in the best of them. My wife. My best friend. Two people I loved, who I trusted blindly. I needed a solution. I realized that I didn't want any more confrontations, I didn't want any more fights. All I wanted was to get out of there. Get out of all that. But don't come out as a victim. No. They could have fooled me, but I wouldn't be the fool at the end of this story. The decision was quick, almost automatic. Divorce. But it wouldn't be just any divorce. I would make a point of leaving her with nothing. Everything we had built together, our home, our comfort, the lifestyle she was accustomed to, would be taken away. Every penny that was to my name, every benefit she took for granted, would evaporate. The same friend who stabbed me in the back didn't know that, before any signature was even put on the paper, I had already taken control of our finances. Joint accounts. Empty. The properties. In transfer process. And she would soon discover that the luxury she knew would be nothing more than a distant memory. Divorce would not just be a separation. It would be a ruin. Her undoing. What would be left of her after I finished? What would she do when she realized that all those comforts, those trips, the expensive dinners and luxurious gifts would disappear forever? I could imagine the moment she would realize. The look of despair, of total helplessness. The woman I once loved, now with nothing. And what about him? My best friend? He would have to deal with the burden of having been an accomplice in his own destruction. He was so blindly involved that he would never have imagined the size of the fall that would come. If they thought they could get away with this, they were sorely mistaken. There would be consequences. Big consequences. As I prepared to take the next step, the future seemed clear. There would be no reconciliation. There would be no second chances. They had made their choices and now they would pay the price. And in the end, I would be the one to come out on top. But would I really be prepared to deal with the consequences of my revenge? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any form of cheating. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry a powerful truth: betrayal destroys lives, families and hearts. Get ready, because what you're going to hear now is an intense story, full of twists and turns and an ending that will leave you breathless. Enjoy, and be ready to be shocked. Lucas's life seemed to have followed the natural course of a modern fairy tale. A successful man, with a stable career at one of the most renowned companies in Los Angeles, Lucas had everything that many wanted. He had married Helena, a charming woman with a striking presence, whose elegance and intelligence captured the attention of everyone around her. Together, they formed a couple admired in all social circles, attended important events and cultivated a life of enviable appearances. The relationship between them, however, was far from perfect, but Lucas didn't see the flaws. From the beginning, there was an almost palpable connection between the two. Conversations unfolded naturally, and the rapport seemed unbreakable. Lucas, a man focused on his goals, has always valued stability. In Helena, he found a safe haven, a woman who seemed to be by his side at every stage of his life. Their ambitions were intertwined, and this, for many years, kept them together. He believed he had found in Helena the ideal partner to face the challenges that lay ahead. Helena, on the other hand, was the type of woman who shined wherever she went. With a prominent career in the fashion world, she maintained a hectic schedule and, even so, never stopped dedicating time to her family. She was a woman with refined habits and an eye that was always attentive to changes. While Lucas saw marriage as a pillar of security, Helena seemed more complex, full of layers that, at times, Lucas didn't know how to decipher. She liked power, influence, and although this seemed natural to those who knew her superficially, there was something deeper, something that Lucas couldn't fully understand. The couple had a habit of frequently going out for dinner at renowned restaurants and organizing get-togethers with friends. Lucas believed that these small celebrations were essential to keeping the relationship in tune. However, over the past few months, he had noticed a subtle change in Helena's behavior. Small signs that, initially, did not cause much concern. Helena started to distance herself a little more, spending nights out due to work commitments or social events that didn't include Lucas. And he, because he blindly trusted his wife, did not allow himself to question the reason for her absence. But as time passed, Lucas's lonely nights began to pile up. He spent most of his nights in the makeshift office he set up at home, surrounded by papers and spreadsheets, trying to fill the emptiness he felt. Helena, when she arrived, exuded an energy that he didn't understand. She always claimed to be tired, but there was something more, a different shine in her eyes, which he couldn't identify if it was good or bad. Still, he decided not to ask. The fear of touching something that could disrupt the life they had built together made him remain silent. The relationship with his best friend, Gustavo, has always been an important part of his life. Friends since college, Gustavo was a constant and almost indispensable presence. He was a charismatic, confident man, with an almost natural ability to win the sympathy of everyone around him. The games, deep conversations and moments shared between Gustavo and Lucas created a friendship that seemed unshakable. It was the kind of bond Lucas had always been proud to have. Gustavo and Helena also got along well, which, for Lucas, was a relief. He valued the fact that his wife and his best friend could have a friendly relationship. He was never bothered by the relaxed way the two talked or the inside jokes that sometimes surfaced. For him, this was a reflection of a healthy environment, where everyone understood each other. Gustavo, always present, became one of the pillars when Lucas needed to vent about the stress of work or even his worries about the direction of his marriage. He listened patiently, offered advice, and often made Lucas feel better, even when the situation seemed hopeless. Helena, in turn, maintained her calm and serene posture, but as time passed, something changed in her. His distant gaze, his scattered attention. The woman who previously worried about everyday details, such as the meals they would have together or the outings they could plan, now seemed absorbed by a world that Lucas no longer reached. She justified this change by saying that her work was increasingly demanding, with new collections, fashion events and travel that left her exhausted. Lucas initially accepted these explanations without hesitation, but as the months passed, his confidence began to erode. Arguments became more frequent. What had previously been just small disagreements about the couple's routine, now began to evolve into fights over bigger issues. Lucas' demands for more time together, Helena's emotional distance, everything seemed to be falling apart little by little. Even so, he still clung to the hope that this was just a phase, something that would soon pass, like all the other difficulties they had faced over the years. The last time they talked about their careers, Helena seemed colder, almost indifferent to the plans Lucas mentioned for the future. He wanted to invest in a new company, expand his professional horizon. She, however, looked away, responding with vague and unenthusiastic words. Something inside Lucas began to awaken, a silent distrust, but he wasn't ready to face that reality yet. I didn't want to admit that maybe something deeper was wrong. Lucas has always been a practical, objective man. I like to solve problems directly, without beating around the bush. And that was what led him to organize a special night for Helena, a dinner that would be a kind of attempt to reconnect what seemed to be lost. He planned every detail, from her favorite restaurant to the wine they used to drink on their most intimate nights. But when he invited her, she simply smiled and refused, citing an urgent work commitment. The disappointment was inevitable, but Lucas hid it, as always. That same night, after her refusal, Helena left the house in a hurry, leaving behind a light fragrance of her favorite perfume. Lucas sat on the sofa in the living room, the sound of silence seemed to scream in his ears. He picked up the phone, thought about calling Gustavo, as he did in moments of frustration, but something stopped him. Instead, he decided to wait. He watched the clock, the hours passing slowly, and, as the night progressed, he realized that, even if he didn't know exactly what was happening, that feeling that everything was hanging in the balance was becoming unbearable. The void left by Helena that night echoed like a shadow in her mind. It wasn't just a physical absence, it was emotional. Lucas was alone, even in a marriage that, to the outside world, seemed unshakable. He knew, deep down, there was something more. Something that hadn't yet been revealed, but that was about to explode into his life with a force he could never predict. And as he prepared to face what was to come, doubt gnawed at him. The sound of the phone vibrating on the bedside table brought Lucas out of his reverie. The night was heavy, and he had already given up trying to understand what was happening at the wedding. Restlessness took over him whenever Helena left, and her absences became more and more frequent. He picked up his cell phone absently, hoping it was just some notification, but the name that appeared on the screen made his heart race, Gustavo. For a moment, he hesitated. Gustavo rarely called at that time. There was no reason to call so late. Something was out of place. Lucas answered, but before he could say anything, Gustavo's voice came from the other side, muffled, as if he were speaking quietly. It was a seemingly unpretentious conversation, but something about that call made him uncomfortable. Maybe it was the tone that was too calm for the time, maybe it was the atmosphere of the night, which was already full of uncertainty. But what really froze Lucas was the background sound, something he almost couldn't identify at first, until he recognized it. It was Helena's voice. Lucas's breath caught. It wasn't unusual for Gustavo to be with Helena, after all, they shared the same social circle. But why didn't they mention this before? Why was her voice so clear and so close? It was a small detail, but it was enough for an uncomfortable feeling to settle in Lucas' chest. He tried not to think too much, to push the thought out of his mind, but the distrust was already planted. Something was wrong. He could feel it. He hung up the phone without prolonging the conversation. He tried to act naturally, as if he wasn't consumed by doubt. But deep inside he already knew he wouldn't be able to sleep that night. Images began to appear in his mind, moments when Helena acted strangely, days when she was more distant than usual, lame excuses that he had accepted without question. Suddenly, everything seemed to make sense. He walked through the house in silence, feeling the echo of his own steps as if they were memories of the once peaceful life. He sat on the sofa, the same place where they had shared laughs, confidences and dreams so many times. But now, this place was empty, just like he felt. The house, once a home, seemed to have transformed into a cold space devoid of any trace of intimacy. Lucas felt the weight of a reality he was not prepared to face. Could it be possible that Helena was betraying her trust? The woman with whom he had built a life, with whom he believed he shared everything, now seemed like a stranger. The thoughts were relentless, and he couldn't shake them. The image of Helena with Gustavo tormented him. It was absurd, but at the same time, the logic of his suspicions pushed him to a precipice from which he could not return. As the hours passed, the anguish grew within him. There was no point in trying to ignore it anymore. Lucas needed answers. And I needed them now. He picked up the phone once again and, without thinking much, dialed Helena's number. The phone rang once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail. His heart sped up. She never failed to answer. The feeling of being deceived took over him overwhelmingly. He felt as if his entire body was trapped in an unbearable tension, as if the very air around him had become heavier. There was something going on. He knew that now. Unable to sit still any longer, Lucas grabbed his car keys and left, determined to confront his own fears. The streets were practically deserted, the sound of the car engine was the only thing that filled the silence of that early morning. Lucas's mind wandered between scenes that he didn't want to believe, but that became more and more real. With each kilometer he covered, his anxiety increased, until he reached his destination almost automatically. He stopped the car and stood there, observing Gustavo's house from afar. The lights were off, but he knew Helena was there. She needed to be. The silence on the street was oppressive, and Lucas found himself fighting the urge to just walk away and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't live in doubt any longer. After a few minutes of waiting that seemed like an eternity, he saw something that confirmed his worst suspicions. The door of the house opened, and Helena came out. She was accompanied by Gustavo, and the two were laughing, talking as if they shared a secret that he would never be able to understand. The intimacy between them was undeniable, and Lucas's world collapsed all at once. He felt swallowed by a sense of betrayal so deep that his legs seemed to give way. The scenes that previously only inhabited his mind were now real, right in front of him. There were no more doubts. The woman he loved and the man he trusted were together, plotting behind his back. For a moment, Lucas wanted to scream, confront them right there, demand explanations. But I couldn't. His body was paralyzed, his heart was beating fast, while a cold anger took over his chest. He watched them for a few more seconds before deciding he had seen enough. That betrayal, which he feared so much, was now wide open before him. He returned to the car, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The night, which seemed endless, now had a new layer of darkness. What would he do from that moment on? What was left for someone who had lost everything in a single instant? Lucas knew that revelation was just the beginning. Lucas didn't know how he got there. The revelation of Helena and Gustavo's betrayal still pulsed in his mind like an inescapable echo. The images from the night before, her leaving his house, the smile on her face, the complicity in her gestures, were etched in his memory with painful clarity. He spent the night awake, sitting on the couch, his body inert, but his mind in ebullience. The betrayal was done. And now, what to do with all that? He needed answers. He could no longer live with the doubts, with the anguish of not fully understanding what had led him to this point. He decided to act. It wouldn't be impulsively. Anger boiled inside him, but he controlled it. He knew that confronting Helena and Gustavo immediately would not bring him peace. It needed to be strategic, methodical. More than anything, Lucas wanted to understand why. Why? What had he done or failed to do? How could the two people he loved most in his life have betrayed him so deeply? When Helena arrived home that morning, acting as if nothing had happened, Lucas felt a knot form in his stomach. She greeted him with a cold, superficial kiss on the cheek, before rushing to take a shower and change her clothes. He watched her every move, trying to decipher what was going through her mind. The woman he knew so well now seemed like a complete stranger. He waited until Helena was relaxed, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. It was the perfect opportunity. She didn't suspect anything. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with tension. Helena looked up, surprised by the seriousness in Lucas' tone. "Of course," she replied, trying to appear unconcerned, but something in his gaze made her uncomfortable. Lucas sat across from her, keeping his eyes fixed on hers, searching for any trace of regret or guilt. "I called you last night," he began. "I spoke to Gustavo." Gustavo's name made Helena's fingers twitch around the cup. She covered it up quickly, but Lucas noticed the subtle reaction. "You were with him, weren't you?" Helena blinked a few times, her mind clearly racing for an answer. "Yeah, I saw him yesterday. But it was just a quick thing, because of a project we're working on together. You know, about the office renovation." Lucas' blood boiled. The casual way she tried to cover up the truth only increased his silent fury. "And you think I don't realize what's really going on?" He leaned forward, his voice still controlled but now carrying a palpable intensity. "Do you think I'm blind?" Helena stepped back slightly, surprised by the change in tone. "What are you talking about, Lucas?" He stood up abruptly, unable to control himself any longer. "I know about you too. I saw it. I know you're with Gustavo." For a moment, the silence was absolute. The shock on Helena's face was evident. She wasn't prepared for that. "Lucas. I can explain." "Explain." He laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh, only bitterness. "What can you explain?" "That the man I considered my brother is sleeping with my wife. That you betrayed me in the worst way possible." Helena stood up, her expression quickly changing from surprise to a mixture of guilt and despair. I made a mistake, Lucas. I made a terrible mistake. But it wasn't what you think. It's not just about that. Isn't that all about it?" Lucas repeated in disbelief. "You destroyed our marriage, our life. And you have the nerve to tell me it's not just about that?" She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her voice was already shaking. "You need to understand. Gustavo and it wasn't something we planned. I never wanted to hurt you." Lucas shook his head. "Wanting or not wanting doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you betrayed me. You both betrayed me." Helena looked like she was on the verge of tears, but Lucas didn't want to see her side. Not at that moment. He was furious, and any attempt by her to justify or minimize the situation only enraged him further. "I want a divorce," he said suddenly, the decision coming with a clarity he hadn't expected. "I want you out of my life. And more than that, I want you to pay for all of this." The words came out with a force that left Helena paralyzed. She didn't expect Lucas to be so direct, so decisive. "Lucas, please don't do it like that. Let's talk, we can work this out somehow." "Resolve?" He laughed, once again bitterly. "There's nothing to resolve. You already made your decision when you went to bed with Gustavo." Helena looked desperate now. "You don't understand. I didn't do this out of lack of love. I still love you, Lucas, but..." "But what?" Lucas interrupted, feeling a new wave of anger wash over him. "Do you love Gustavo too? Is that it?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It's not about love, Lucas. It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. I don't know what happened, but I still love you. Lucas watched her for a long moment, trying to process her words. But it was too late. Nothing she said now could erase the pain, the betrayal. He had been stabbed in the back by the two people he trusted most. You're leaving the house today, he said, his voice cold and calculated. And I'll make sure you don't take anything. You'll leave without a penny, Helena. She looked at him, shocked. What are you talking about? All of our joint accounts, the assets. I've already taken care of everything. You have nothing left. Helena looked confused, unable to fully understand what he was saying. What did you do? Lucas took a step forward, keeping his gaze fixed on her eyes. I locked all of our joint accounts. The money you used, the lifestyle you knew, all of that is gone. You won't take anything from this marriage, Helena. Nothing. She blinked, trying to process. The impact of Lucas' words began to slowly sink in, and his face turned pale. You can't do this. I already did, he replied, voice impassive. I was smarter than you thought. While you were playing with Gustavo, I was taking care of everything. And now, you have nothing left. The apartment you liked so much. It's in my name. The bills? Empty. Did you find it, that I would come out of this unscathed, but I was wrong. Helena brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in shock. She began to understand the true weight of what Lucas had done. It wasn't just the marriage that was in shambles. It was all the life she knew. She betrayed him, yes, but she never imagined the consequences would be so devastating. The room fell into an oppressive silence. Lucas felt the tension in the air, watching Helena's every movement, every expression that crossed her face. He finally had control of the situation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had one. But then, something unexpected happened. Helena, who was paralyzed by shock, suddenly let out a nervous, almost desperate laugh. Do you think it's over, Lucas? She asked, her voice trembling, but with a tone of desperation that he didn't immediately recognize. You think you destroyed me, but you have no idea what's coming. And with that, she left the room, leaving Lucas alone with his doubts. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. Lucas stood there, alone, breathing heavily, feeling the wave of adrenaline that had invaded him slowly dissipate. His body, rigid with tension until then, began to relax, but his mind was still pulsing with Helena's words. Her laugh, that nervous, desperate laugh, resonated in his head, leaving him uneasy. She had spoken as if she knew something he didn't, as if she were hiding something even greater. But what? What else could there be after the betrayal, after everything she had done? What could be more devastating? Lucas approached the window, feeling the light morning breeze coming through the crack. The cold didn't seem to reach him. He was anesthetized. The feeling of victory he had felt when he put Helena against the wall was now tinged with doubt, with an insecurity he couldn't name. The anger that had previously boiled inside him was now mixed with a dull anguish. He had destroyed everything. He had repaid the betrayal with the deepest blow he could deliver, but, at the same time, an uneasiness was gnawing at him. Why did she laugh? Why had Helena, faced with her imminent ruin, reacted with that mixture of disbelief and despair? As much as he tried to ignore it, Lucas' instinct warned him. Something was wrong, very wrong. Helena knew something. And whatever it was, he would need to find out. He left the room in a sudden movement, heading towards the bedroom. Every step I took through the house seemed to echo a little louder. The silence, now heavier than ever, enveloped him like a suffocating presence. The room, which had once been a haven of intimacy, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to squeeze him. Lucas paced from side to side, his thoughts swirling, trying to organize himself amid the emotional chaos that Helena had left behind. He tried to remember the past few weeks, the interactions, the moments that now seemed distant. I was looking for some clue, something that could make sense of that uncomfortable feeling that the worst was yet to come. The moral dilemma began to form in his mind. Had he gone too far? Would destroying Helena's finances, the lifestyle she knew, be fair revenge? He had acted out of anger, betrayal, and pain. But, when he saw her leaving the room with that laugh, a part of him wondered if he had, in fact, won. The hours dragged by, and Lucas's phone rang several times, but he ignored all the calls. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. Not yet. He needed to process everything. Gustavo, Helena, betrayals were mixed with their feelings of loss and frustration. Even the silence in the house, which before seemed like a space of peace, now tormented him. The decision to take control of everything had been the only thing Lucas had controlled in recent months. He knew that Helena would never expect such a drastic move. The woman has always underestimated her ability to act in a calculated way. But that laugh. He couldn't get that sound out of his mind. What could be hidden behind that? The moral dilemma grew in his chest. At some point, he had believed that destroying her would be enough to ease his pain, to heal the wound opened by betrayal. But now, he wasn't so sure. Maybe there was something deeper, something he hadn't seen until that moment. As the thoughts swirled in his head, he remembered something Helena used to say, almost always as a joke. I always have an ace up my sleeve. At the time, Lucas saw it as part of her biting humor, but now, in light of everything that had happened, those words seemed like a premonitory warning. Suddenly the need to find out what she was hiding became unbearable. Lucas returned to his office, where he kept most of his important documents. He went through drawers, folders and boxes he hadn't touched in months. Something in him told him the answer was there, somewhere, and he wouldn't stop until he found it. Maybe a contract, a message, anything that could shed light on what Helena meant with that sinister laugh. After almost an hour of shuffling through papers, he found a folder that looked out of place. It wasn't something he usually accessed, but Helena's name was scrawled across one of the tabs. Upon opening it, Lucas found a series of financial documents, many of which he didn't immediately recognize. His eyes ran through the lines of text, but it was only when he reached the end that information stood out: bank accounts abroad, large transfers that he had never authorized. A chill ran down his spine. Helena had been more prepared than he imagined. Not only had she foreseen the possibility that he would discover the betrayal, but she was also ready to protect herself. The accounts Lucas had frozen and the money he thought he had taken from her, that meant nothing. Helena had already transferred a large part of the assets into her own name, and worse, he had never noticed. The pain of physical betrayal was now mixed with the bitter taste of financial betrayal. Lucas had been made a fool of, not only in love but also in business. Helena had deceived him in every way possible, and while he believed he was in control, she had already ensured her own exit. Lucas's heart accelerated. He clenched his fists, fighting not to explode in anger again. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. All the power he thought he had over Helena, the entire revenge plan, had been for nothing. She laughed because she was already ahead of him. Way ahead. With the documents in hand, he threw himself into the office armchair, the weight of the revelation suffocating him. Helena had charted a path of destruction, and Lucas now saw himself as another piece in her game. Everything he had done to destroy her, all the calculated actions, nothing mattered. She always had a bigger plan, a way out that he never would have predicted. Lucas was cornered, trapped in his own trap. Lucas was still sitting in the office chair when the weight of everything finally hit him. Helena's betrayal, her disappointment with Gustavo, the discovery that her revenge plan had been in vain. He felt crushed by the failure of his control, but at the same time, something deep within him began to change. The anger, once so burning, began to dissipate, leaving space for a calculated coldness. Lucas was no longer the man who would allow himself to be consumed by pain. He knew he needed a new strategy. The hours passed, and he analyzed the documents in front of him more calmly. Helena had surpassed him financially, that was a fact. But there was still something she didn't have, her dignity. He might be emotionally broken, but she wouldn't be the one to define the direction of his life from then on. Lucas decided it was time to turn the page for good. The next day, without fanfare, he contacted his lawyer and arranged for the divorce proceedings to officially begin. There would be no more games, no more exchanges of accusations. Everything would be resolved legally, coldly, with as little contact as possible between him and Helena. Deep down, I knew she would walk away with much more than she deserved, but it no longer mattered. Lucas's true victory would be to move on, to rebuild his life without the burden of that betrayal. A few days later, Helena appeared at the house, with a tired look that Lucas didn't recognize in her. She entered without saying a word, her eyes scanning the room as if to confirm what she already knew: the house they once shared was no longer a home, it was just an empty space. Upon seeing him sitting at the table, Helena hesitated for a moment, as if searching for something in his gaze, a spark of remorse or guilt. But he found nothing. "So, that's it?" she asked, her voice filled with a tiredness that went beyond the physical. Lucas looked back at her, his face calm but resolute. "Yeah. We've reached the end." Helena lowered her eyes, and for a moment, he could almost see the woman he had once loved, now distant, lost in her own regrets. But Lucas did not allow himself to feel pity. He stood up, approached her and handed her a folder with divorce papers. "Everything you need is here. It will be what you always wanted." She took the papers with shaking hands, and for a brief moment, it looked like she might say something. Maybe a last attempt to explain, to justify himself, but Lucas knew it didn't matter anymore. He no longer needed to hear anything. He was ready to let her go, and more than that, he was ready to leave too. Without looking back, he left the room, leaving Helena alone with the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Gustavo, in turn, had disappeared. After the betrayal was exposed, he cut off contact with Lucas and even Helena. Lucas wasn't surprised. Gustavo, despite his appearance of confidence, had always been a man who avoided facing problems head-on. It was easier for him to hide, to avoid direct confrontation with the people he once called friends. Lucas found out from other mutual friends that Gustavo had moved to another city, trying to start his life over in silence. But the guilt would follow him, even if he never admitted it. As the weeks went by, the house that once housed the most important moments of Lucas's life began to seem like just a space, an empty shell. He began to slowly empty it, sell the furniture, rearrange what was left. It was no longer an escape from the past, but a conscious reconstruction. He no longer viewed the memories with pain, but with the acceptance that that part of his life was over. It was on a Sunday morning that Lucas, finally free of all emotional burdens, looked at his bank account and made a final decision. Helena could have secured her financial future, but Lucas still had what mattered most: the ability to reinvent himself. He would use what was left of his resources to start over in a place where the past could not reach him. A new city, a new life project. He would sell the house, leave there and find a new purpose, free from any shadow of Helena or Gustavo. The divorce was finalized quietly. Helena made no demands beyond what was already foreseen. The separation was quick, practical, without exchanges of barbs. They both knew the true end had happened long before the papers were signed. On the day he left the house for the last time, Lucas looked back one last time. Not with nostalgia, but with the feeling that I had overcome something monumental. He left without guilt, without regrets. The cycle of pain and betrayal was finally over. Now, as he walked to his car, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. What did you think of this story? Leave your comment and share your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remembering that this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Here, our stories are fictional, but the impact of betrayal on people's lives is very real.